Tonight's shiur is called Neck and Neck, the Kabbalistic insights to the significance of the hanging of Haman, and conversely, the desire of Haman to hang Mordechai. This is part 2, and just briefly outlining. Last week we discussed how the Baal Rokeach writes that despite the fact that the temple has been destroyed, there are 2 items in the temple that still have a relevance and a correspondence to the time of Galut, to the time that the Jewish people are in exile. We know that there were different items in the holy. And the holy is that the way the temple works is you come into the Azara, to the Ezrat Kohanim, to the hallway of the Kohanim, where the Kohanim did the majority of the service as far as the sacrifices is concerned, on the outer altar. And then there was the holy, and the Leviim are allowed there, and also any Jewish people a person who's bringing the sacrifice, he's allowed there as well at the time of his sacrifice. Then there's what's called the Ulam, or the holy, and there is only where the Kohanim are allowed to enter. That's in a proper Ulam, a proper chamber that is totally closed, as opposed to the outer area that is actually opened. It's under the sky. And there are important items that make up the holy, or the integral part of the Beit HaMikdash. One of them, of course, is the menorah, the candelabra that was lit every single day. One of them is a small altar, the golden altar, or the altar of the Ketoret, the incense that was offered every single day. And one of the other items is the shulchan, the table that held the showbread. Every week, the Kohanim would bake new bread, put them in on Friday, take out the old one, put in the new one, and miraculously it remained fresh from week to week. And we outlined that the Baal Rokeach says that the showbread, the table, corresponds to the festival of Purim, and the menorah corresponds to the festival of Hanukkah. So we discussed that, a little bit more like last week. Those who want here can hear it on the internet. We will post it up very shortly. The question that we asked last week is a few things. First of all, what is the relationship between Purim and the fact that the Hachamim instituted that we celebrate it predominantly through a meal, and Hanukkah that we predominantly celebrate it through Hallel v'Hoda'ah, through thanksgiving and through praise to Hashem? That is one of the questions. The other question is the relationship between the hanging of Haman, why was he hung, etc. So, very briefly, we discuss that there was a meal, and on Purim, the Jewish people ate from the Jewish people ate from the meal of the Hashverosh. We discussed the significance of that, and then we said that the downfall of the Jewish people was through that eating of the meal, and the beginning of the redemption was through Esther, through the meal that she made or entrapped Haman with that meal. So it's obvious that there is a connection to a meal. But obviously it's much deeper than that, and we are going to outline that this week. Last week we set the stage of understanding what is the concept of the head, the neck, and we brought the sages that said, the pasuk that says, Ki tisa et rosh, when you will uplift the head of the Jewish people. It doesn't say the head of the children of Israel. It just says when you will uplift the head. And we outlined last week that refers to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that refers to Hashem himself, and we brought a verse to prove that. So now we understand there's a concept of head, concept of body. On a spiritual, just like the head is the essence and the life source of all of the body. Sever the head, you have no life, even though the body may function, can be transplanted, and everything about the body can be fine. Sever the head, you no longer have any energy, any vitality to the body. So too, the Jewish people's head is the Almighty. He's the essence, the source of it all. God forbid, if you sever the head, if you sever that relationship, then God forbid, there is a lack of life. And then we said that there are two, what joins the head and the body together? That was the neck. The neck is something very unique, very special. We find many times, many verses that praises and glorifies the beauty of the neck. The neck is, when a woman stands erect, for example, in Shir HaShirim, we find that the neck enhances a certain beauty. So there's a quality to the neck. As we will soon see further, it has other connotations as well. But we said that in the neck there are two primary aspects to the neck. The primary aspects to the neck is the kaneh and the veshet, the esophagus and the trachea, the windpipe and the eating pipe. Very simple. And they are very important because they give us breath, they give us food, they give us life. They have a spiritual component as well. What is a spiritual component? The spiritual component is that the windpipe relates to Hakol Kol Yaakov, the beautiful quality by which the Jewish people are known for, by which Yaakov Avinu is known for when he came to receive the blessings from Yitzhak, from his father Yitzhak. You recall that he said, Hakol Kol Yaakov, v'hayadayim yedei Esav. The voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esav, because he felt him, and he felt that, these were the hands. Externally, he felt like Esav, but internally, he spoke, he had the softness in his speech like Yaakov, but predominantly because, if you remember the verses, he actually mentioned the name of God, which wasn't usual for Esav to do. And the sages teach us that in that verse lies a very powerful message for the Jewish people, that as long as we voice the voice of Jacob, we're able to control the material world or the hands of Esav. Not only our enemies, but also the material world by extension. How so? By voicing the voice of Jacob. What is the voice of Jacob? We know the difference between Esav and Yaakov is Esav, ish tzayid, ish sadeh. Esav, his brother, was a hunting man of the field. And we know that Yaakov was ish tam yoshev ohalim. He was a pure person, a wholehearted person, a sincere person who studied Torah. That was his whole preoccupation, to study Torah. So the kaneh, the trachea is the one that is responsible for breath, for air, but it's also responsible for voice. So on a spiritual level, it is the symbol of Torah study and prayer. What about the esophagus? The esophagus is that which brings in food. On a spiritual level, that represents the essence of the material side of a human being. The greatest symbol of a person's physicality, more than his breath of life, which is more spiritual, is food and drink. And therefore, that too has a spiritual dimension, and as we discussed in previous lectures, that is to eat or to live a material world, even that which is most base and most crass, like eating, for the sake of heaven, and uplift it for the sake of heaven, as we discussed at length in previous shurim. Sever that, and you sever that which bonds you and connects you to your head, to your spiritual source, to spirituality. We mentioned that the way a Jewish person eats an animal is, in fact, to sever these two things, because this is the very life source of the animal. And therefore what we are doing is we are severing the most basic material, physical component of the animal, and then divesting it of its more material side, of its blood, etc., and then only then eating it. In other words, we are more preparing it. We are preparing our meal to become a little bit more spiritual by divesting it of its materialism, and then hopefully eating it in its state of kashrut, with blessing and with the right intentions for the sake of heaven. Similarly, as we mentioned last week, the Gemara speaks about a righteous person who slaughters his evil inclination. What does it mean, a righteous person who slaughters his evil inclination? Why does he use the expression slaughters the evil inclination? It must then mean someone who has taken under his control, again the neck, they're referring to those two parts of the body of the neck, or his body, and that is the windpipe, the breathing pipe, and the esophagus, the eating pipe. Meaning to say that he uses his voice for the sake of heaven, for the study of Torah, for prayer, to express words in the right way, in the right manner, not in a manner of vulgarism, not in a way that destroys, but rather builds, but also in regards to the meal, the food that he eats, he's totally under control. So perhaps this is the reason why the Gemara uses the expression, who is a righteous person? He who, so to speak, slaughters the evil inclination, meaning to say, just as you would slaughter an animal and sever the higher part of it from the lower part of it, from the more material side of it, so too does the righteous person or the kosher person. Adam kasher, a kosher person, is someone who is able to bring that under his control. There is a very interesting Gemara in Masechet Ta'anit. The Gemara reads as follows: Rav Nachman v'Rabbi Yitzhak haviyat v'b'seudat. Rabbi Nachman and Rabbi Yitzhak were sitting having a meal. It's interesting to note that the Gemara speaks about this in the context of a meal. Amale Rabbi Nachman Rabbi Yitzhak. Rabbi Nachman said to Rabbi Yitzhak, Lemar mar milta. Let the master say some words of Torah. Let him say something. It's always nice when someone else is speaking while I'm eating and someone else is speaking, so I can, grab the celery and go, you talk, I'll eat. No, God forbid, that wasn't the intention. Lemar mar milta. Let the master say some words of Torah, even though we're eating. Let us infuse the meal with words of Torah. Amalei hachi amar Rabbi Yohanan. This is what he told him. This is what Rabbi Yohanan, the great teacher, says. En mesihin b'seuda. We do not talk in the middle of the meal. You got out of that one. Got out of that one, good. Why? He gave a reason. Shema yagdim kaneh laveshet. Maybe you will cause the food to go down the windpipe as opposed to the esophagus. V'yavoli de sakana, and he'll come to endanger himself. Simple. You don't talk. If you talk, you may choke on your food. You may choke on your food. That's what we tell our children all the time. I tell my children as well, don't talk when you're eating. They say, but I'm not eating. So I said, so eat something. Eat something, you won't have to talk. Batar Sauda, after the meal, when they finished the meal, Amalei decided, I'll tell you a word of Torah. I'll tell you a teaching. Amalei, he said to him, Hachi Amar Rabbi Yohanan, this is what Rabbi Yohanan said. Yaakov Avinu lo met. Our forefather Jacob did not die. And the Gemara there asks, what do you mean he didn't die? How can he say he didn't die? The Gemara says they embalmed him, they buried him, they eulogized him. So the Gemara ends up saying that Mazaro b'hayim, afu b'hayim, just as his children are alive, so too he is alive. And many teachings and interpretations about that are abound and are very beautiful. But the Hatam Sofer has a revolutionary idea over here. What is the connection? Here they are sitting in a meal, and he tells him, Rabbi Nachman says to Rabbi Yitzhak, let the master say something. He says, we don't talk in the meal, because maybe the windpipe, where you'll choke on the food. Maybe the food will go down the windpipe as opposed to the food pipe. Okay, that's fair enough, reasonable. Later on, after the meal, when you can talk already, he says, Yaakov Avinu did not pass away. What's the connection between the two? There must be a connection. Why did he choose, out of all of the teachings of Rabbi Yochanan, to say this teaching? How is it associated with his previous teaching? The Hatam Sofer has a beautiful, beautiful connection. He says as possible. It says as follows. A person should never think that our primary ingredient in life is the kaneh, is the not the esophagus, the trachea, the windpipe. Rabbi Yitzhak seemed to be of the view that, eating, you're associated in the mundane, but let us talk Torah. Why? Because the mundane is exactly that, it's the mundane. How much can you elevate already the mundane? How much can the mundane become a service of God unto itself? So Rabbi Yitzhak answered Rabbi Nachman. Rabbi Yitzhak answered Rabbi Nachman and he said, don't make this error. Don't think that in fact the eating in our material side and our existence in this physical world is totally secondary and subordinate. In fact, this in itself is a very great service of God. If a person is able to eat and to live his material world with a psyche, with a mentality that he's doing everything for the sake of heaven, in fact, this is a very noble thing. Not for naught. There were two things in the temple. There was the table that held the showbread that represents parnasah, food, material side, and there was also the menorah. And guess what? Both of them were facing each other. One should not make an error and think that no, one is more important than the other. Of course, without Torah, we will never be able to have the discipline to be able to bring the materialism under the influence of spirituality, no doubt. But one should not think that one should disassociate himself from the material world to the extent that occupy himself only with Torah and have nothing to do with the material world. In fact, the material world, God created the material world, the soul exists within the material world, the Torah was given in the material world, and ultimately God gave the Torah and told the Jewish people, go forth in the land of Israel and take the Torah and transplant it in the material world. He didn't want them hanging around in the desert, studying Torah all day long. He wanted them to go into the land of Israel, to live physical lives and transplant the Torah in their daily lives, where they work, how they eat, how they conduct their lives. Because if you do that, you will come to danger. Meaning to say, you will, so to speak, sever one part, one important ingredient, that which connects you to God. Remember we said before, the head being the symbolism of God, our head, our life source, and the body being the Jewish nation. And the neck that connects us. What connects us? Two things. The Torah in our prayers, and also how we conduct ourselves in the material world, how we translate the Torah into the material physical world. One should not make an error, said Rabbi Nachman. Said Rabbi Yitzhak to Rabbi Nachman, and think that we should give total priority to Torah and totally neglect the material side. That is incorrect. You will come to danger. That is an incorrect approach. And this is a connection to Yaakov Avinu Lomet. The concept of death is associated with impurity, is associated with sin. So then it stands to reason that someone who never sins is never attached to the concept of death. Yaakov Avinu was a type of person who lived his life in a totally spiritual way. But neither was he expected from God to totally detach himself. God expected him to go and live in none other in the house of Lavan, and to go and establish a nation of Israel. And he worked as a shepherd for many, many years. And he was there to show morals and ethics to the people around him. He became a wealthy man. How did he conduct himself with his wealth? What priorities did he teach his children? How did he behave whilst he was wealthy? How did he behave whilst he ate, whilst he slept, etc.? Etc. was a very important component to Yaakov Avinu. So in essence, Yaakov Avinu so refined himself, so refined his body, that not only his spirit wasn't consumed in this physical world and totally wasted, but even his body was pure and holy. And we know that those people who are on the most holiest of levels, that they never sin, that their body becomes a vehicle for spirituality, are not separated from godliness even when they pass away. And this is why quite often we find that when they exhume bodies of very righteous people, their body does not decompose, does not decay. Because decomposition, decay, is associated with death, is associated with impurities, associated with one of the mechanisms by which the body becomes refined, by which sin is expiated, that the body returns back to the elements, totally nullified, etc., as we spoke about it in previous shiurim. Which isn't so by Esav. What happened with Esav? We know that there was a very big difference between the lifestyle and the attitude of Esav and Yaakov. Esav, being the firstborn, he barges into the tent of Yaakov. He smells a beautiful aroma, some nice, beautiful red lentils, and he's very hungry. And he says to him a very uncultured statement, one that normal person doesn't use. Haleiteni na min ha'adom hazeh. Let me waffle down. Let me just gulp it and swallow it. Now, you don't talk like that. Hey, can I have some of the food? Can I eat something? Let me waffle it down. You don't talk like that. But that was the lifestyle. That was the focus of Esav. Haliteni na. To gulp down, to swallow down the physical world as much as possible, without any refinement. I always say the concept of washing our hands, netilat yadayim, and sometimes people say Mizmor LeDavid before they wash their hands, or after they wash their hands before Hamotzi, the different customs in that regard. And the bracha that we make is a very good tool by which that we delay self-gratification. You want to eat, you're hungry. Oh, you want to eat, you want to hungry? Hang on a minute. You've got to wash your hands, make sure your hands are totally dry. You've got to get the vessel, get the water. There's a delay over here. And once there's a delay, you're making a bracha, netilat yadayim, and you're thinking what netilat yadayim is all about. There's a delay of self-gratification. The Yetzer Hara says, come and eat. Your body says, I demand to eat right now, like Esav. Let me waffle it down without any delay. No, the Jewish way is, no, there is a delay. You want to eat? Hang on a minute. There's a delay. There's discipline here. You wash your hands. You delay it. You allow yourself to think about what you're doing. You thank God for the food. You don't just waffle it down immediately. That enables us to uplift the food. Not to just waffle it down, to refine ourselves and to refine our food, to refine the base and the crass side of us. And that was the difference between Esav and Amalek. Very interesting to note. Esav tells him, Yaakov tells him, I'll give you the lentils, but you got to sell me the bechorah, the birthright. So he says, what do I need the birthright for? Take the birthright, it's all yours. I'm not interested in the birthright. What was the birthright? Does anybody know what the birthright was? What was the birthright? The birthright was the right to serve in the temple. What? The right to serve in the temple. Until the Jewish people sinned in the sin of the golden calf, the priests were to be the representative from each family. Who? The firstborn. The firstborn. The firstborn of every family was destined to be the priests. So Yaakov was fighting for the right to serve in the temple, to serve in the sanctuary, to have that role. And what did Esav say? Take it, it's yours. Not only did he say, take it, it's yours. Vayibes be'aynav et ha-bechorah. Vayibes be'aynav. He scorned the bechorah. Why? V'lama ze li ha-bechorah. What do I need the bechorah for? What do I need it for? What does it give me? I'm interested in food. I'm interested in the material world. I'm not interested in serving in the temple. There's discipline serving in the temple. Take it, it's yours. Interesting to note that Targum Onkelos, one of the great sages, who was in fact a convert, he was a nephew of the Caesar of Rome. He translates the word Vayibes be'aynav, and Esav scorned the birthright, as V'shat Esav yad bechurta. V'shat Esav yad bechurta. And Esav scorned the birthright. V'shat is the same spelling as veshet, which means the esophagus, the very tool that caused him to scorn the bechorah. The very word for scorn in Aramaic is the very word for what caused him to scorn the bechorah, the priesthood, or the birthright. What is that? Veshet, the esophagus, the eating pipe, because he was interested in the material world. That was his downfall. That's what caused his downfall. All he was interested in is the material world. Whereas Yaakov wanted to be involved in the temple and the service of the temple. And what was the purpose of the service of the temple, as we outlined a number of weeks ago, was to take every material item and uplift it to the physical world, to the spiritual world. That is the connection between what the first teaching he told him and the second teaching he told him. The first teaching was, we do not proceed, we do not eat, we do not talk in the meal, divrei Torah, in the meal whilst we're eating. Why? Because we do not give preeminence to the concept of Torah over the concept of avodah, the service, and refining the physical world. And that is the connection to the second statement of Yaakov lo met. Yaakov did not pass away, meaning to say that his body was so refined because he refined the physical side of his existence to the extent that he was alive. Getting back to the neck, we have a pasuk, if you recall. The Bet HaMikdash is also called neck, and we will soon see why the Bet HaMikdash is called neck. Remember the pasuk in Bereshit, chapter 45. Vayipol al tzavare Benyamin ahiv vayevk. It says that Yosef, when he met up with the brothers, and when he met up with Benjamin, the youngest brother, he fell upon his necks, plural, and he cried. Tzavarei is plural. Well, how many necks did he have? He only had one neck. Why does it say he fell upon his necks? And the sages take this to mean as a symbolism here. Not only did he cry because of emotions of his brother, but he also had a prophetic vision. What was a prophetic vision? That he knew that the Bet HaMikdash, and predominantly where the area of the altar is, will fall in the side of Benjamin, in his inheritance. That land will be given to the children of Benjamin. And he cried because he saw with a prophetic vision that it'll be destroyed. Both temples will be destroyed. That's why he cried on the necks of Benjamin. And the sages say, because the temple is compared to a neck. Remember we said before, the symbolism of a neck, very important. The neck is very, very beautiful, but the neck also joins. Why is the Bet HaMikdash referred to as a neck? Because it joins us and Hashem. It joins the physical world with Hashem. It takes all of the materialism of the world. It takes the animal kingdom. It takes the domem, tzomea, hai, umedaber. It takes the inanimate, water, the stone by which things are built there. It takes the vegetable, the flour, the oils. It takes the animal and the human that is involved and uplifts everything to the spiritual world, to God. So it's like a neck. It's the bridge that joins them two together. Conversely, it says, Benjamin bacha al tzavarav. Benjamin cried upon the neck of his brother Yosef. Why on the neck and not necks? Because he also had a prophetic vision. And the prophetic vision was that he was crying about the destruction of the Mishkan in Shiloh, which was in the inheritance of the land of Yosef. Both of them cried about not only physical aspects, brothers reuniting, but also because of their spiritual fate, what will be with their inheritance. And the greatest and glorious part of their inheritance is not the properties that they will build there or destroy there, or how much the value of land will be, or how big buildings they will build or not build. The most primary ingredient to their possession was spirituality, was the Bet HaMikdash that was to fall in the lot and the inheritance and the land of Benjamin, and the Mishkan, the tabernacle, which was to fall, which was to be for many, many years in the land of Shiloh, which was the inheritance of Yosef. So we see that the Bet HaMikdash is called neck. And the reason why it's called neck is because it fuses us with God. Having said that, we have to understand that even in the temple you have the two components. In the neck you have the two components. You have the windpipe and you have the food pipe. And these are very important components in the temple. We know that the Shelach HaKadosh, one of the great Kabbalists who lived about 500 years ago, he's buried in Tevera. If any of you ever went up to the grave of the Rambam, Maimonides, so before you go up to the grave of Maimonides, the Shelach HaKadosh, just at the beginning of that, when you're going up that small section of where a lot of tzaddikim are buried, the Shelach HaKadosh is right there in the beginning. Been there, so he's right there. So he writes an interesting thing. He writes that the shulchan is on the right, the table is on the right of the temple, and the menorah is on the left. The menorah is a symbol of wisdom, as it says Harotze sheyahkim yadrim. He who wants to be wise, let him meditate upon that which sits in the south. What sat in the south? Well, we know that the Holy of Holies was in the west. So therefore, in the south was, as you enter on the left, which is the south, because you're facing west as you come into the Holy of Holies, is the menorah, the candelabra. Harotzeshi Ashir, someone who wants to be enriched, be wealthy, Yatzfin, let him meditate upon that which was in the north. As you come in to the Holy of Holies, you look to the north because you're facing west. What's on the north? The shulchan, the table. On this table is the representation of Parnassah and God's love for the Jewish people and his concern for their well-being, their sustenance. And that's on the right. What do you think is on the right? And what do you think is on the left of the neck? The right of the neck is the esophagus, which is connected to food, which is connected to the table. So we've got the neck. The neck represents, what does it represent? The Bet HaMikdash. So when you enter the holy in the Bet HaMikdash on the right, what do you have on the right? The right is the table. That represents the material, this physical side of us. That is the food pipe. What's on the left? On the left is the windpipe. What's on the left in the Bet HaMikdash? The menorah, the candelabra. Ki ner mitzvah v'torah or. For ner, for a candle, is mitzvah and Torah is light. The candelabra represents wisdom. That's why someone who wants to be wise meditates on the candelabra, which is on the left. The Shelah Kadosh also points out that the kaneh, that the windpipe also has 6 tabaot, I don't know how you call it medically, but it has 6 rings to it. You know what you call them? What do they call it? It's got rings. You ever touch the thing in an animal? I learned shchita, so what is it? No, not they've got if you ever touch a windpipe of an animal, I don't know, I never counted in the animal, but next time I go, I'll try and make a point of counting to see whether it corresponds to the human. But it's got 6 rings. It's like this. It's like rings, like an accordion. You learn like an accordion, like discs, but it's not much discs. You know, it's like it's the windpipe is made of a soft substance and a ring. Soft substance and a ring. You ever saw it?
It's called a
sphinster. Sphinster. Okay, so there's 6 of them. That corresponds to the menorah exactly because the menorah has 6 kanim. It has 6 arms. Interesting. So we see that there is a connection not only between the neck, that the neck represents the Bet HaMikdash, but also the windpipe and the esophagus, the right and the left. And these are the 2 items that have a huge impact on our life. Because as I mentioned before, these are the 2 items that bring us the essence of life, breath and also food. But spiritually, they're also hugely influential in our task in this world. To speak correctly, to speak rightly, to speak properly, not to use our mouth for the wrong things, not to use our windpipe for the wrong things. And when we eat for the sake of heaven. We eat kosher food and we eat in a way that is appropriate to elevate the spiritual world, the physical world. And both of them are an important component in our service of God. And one cannot give credence more one to the other. Of course, without Torah, it's impossible to have the other, as we mentioned before, because of the discipline of the Torah. And both of them have to be under our control. Like the Gemara in Zvahim says, that who is a kosher Jew, who is a spiritual Jew? He who is able to take control of these 2 components, both the windpipe and both the esophagus, the eating pipe. Now we understand why on Hanukkah, what's the connection Hanukkah and Purim? Hanukkah, the whole battle of Hanukkah was against the spirit, the mind, the soul. They didn't care that the Jewish people exist. They had no problem with the Jewish people. Want to keep customs, want to keep... But you want to tell me that there's spirituality? There's holiness, there's something called pure and impure. What's this business of oil, pure and impure? They tried to contaminate the soul, the spirit of the Jewish people. Thus the miracle was expressed in the spiritual dimension of things, in the menorah. And that is why on Hanukkah we do two things. We light the menorah and we also praise Hashem by saying Hallel. On Purim we don't say Hallel. We don't sing the Hallel, the special praise of Hallel that praises God for the great miracle. On Purim we read the Megillah because it is a story, it is a mitzvah to recall what happened. But the celebration is through a meal. Hanukkah, we don't have a meal. And notice what the Rokeach said, that Hanukkah is connected to the menorah, and Purim is connected to the table, which held the showbread, which is the physical thing. How do we celebrate Purim? We celebrate it through a meal. We celebrate it through sending mishloach manot to people who can use it for a meal. There's a halachic debate whether we can send uncooked food, raw food. Why? Because if the whole point and purpose of the mishloach manot is not only just to send a beautiful gift, and it has to be food gifts. You can't send someone money, you can't send him a gold ring. It's got to be food. So there's a halachic debate whether you can send him non-cooked food. If the whole point and purpose of the Mishloach Manot is enable to someone to have a festive meal on Purim, to allow him to have a festive meal or a greater festive meal, then the food should be cooked. And it should be food stuff, not lollies. It should be something that is edible, not a lolly. Because the miracle of Purim had very much to do with the physical dimension of a Jew. And that is no less than Hanukkah. In fact, it's even greater than Hanukkah, because the material side, because the threat, by the way, of the Jewish people was on the body of the Jewish people, to eradicate the body. Now, we said before that there are two components. There's the spirit, which is expressed through Torah, study and learning. Then there's the body, that is expressed through the material world, the food that we eat, and whatever function, physical function that we do, that we serve God through that. That is also important. And in fact, really, that is the real component that will herald in the Messianic redemption, refining the physical world. When you refine the physical world, you allow for a revelation of God, a greater revelation of God, the Messianic redemption. How? By refining the physical world. To be sure, we refine the physical world also through words of Torah as well. But much more so when you deal with the physical world and you use everything l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven. And the intention that we eat, and the activities that we do after, because food turns into energy. What energy do you do after you eat the food? If you do something that is negative, then you've taken that energy and you've translated it into something bad. But if you take that energy, use it for good, like doing good deeds, like earning a livelihood in order to be able to support your family, in order to give tzedakah, in order to be able to eat and to keep Shabbat and all of these different type of things, or you study Torah right after that, you've taken that energy and you've turned it into absolute holiness and spirituality. Something that is so material, so crass, so base. And now we understand the connection to Purim and the meal, that they erred through the meal. Their downfall was through the meal because, as we mentioned last week, they took pleasure in the meal. That was a diminishing of our objective, to take the meal, to take our food and to uplift it and to refine it. That caused the decree in the first place. When the Jewish people were reattached themselves to the study of Torah, to the discipline of Torah, then the downfall of Haman and the redemption of the Jewish people took place through the meal. There was a tikkun over here, there was a rectification of their meal, or the problem that was caused through their meal, or their lack of heightened spirituality with the meal that they ate with Ahashverosh. Amalek comes from Haman comes from Amalek, we said. Haman Agagi. Agag was the king of Amalek in the time of Shaul HaMelech. Who was Amalek? Does anybody remember who was his grandfather? Esav. He was the son of Eliphaz. What? Eliphaz was his father. Was his father. And his grandfather was Esav. There could have been a couple of Amaleks along the way that were named the same name, but the Zera Amalek comes from Esav. What did Esav do? Let me waffle down the food. Not interested in spirituality. Yaakov was to take both the meal, and the meal, by the way, that he was preparing, both Torah and the meal, and use it for the service of God. By the way, the meal that he was preparing was because he was mourning for his grandfather, Abraham, that passed away on that day. Esav, also a grandson, didn't care. He just wanted the food dimension of it. When Yaakov ate, he wanted to eat the food. The lentils is a sign of mourning. So his food was used for a mitzvah. Esav was taking the food, wanted to use it for his own purposes. Haman comes from Agag, that comes from Amalek, that comes from Esav. So that mentality has trickled down. And it's become the antithesis of the Jewish people and what they represent. To uplift, to use everything for the spiritual. So what does Haman want to do? What does Amalek want to do? He wants to sever the relationship. Remember, the 10 sons of Haman were instrumental in stopping the Bet HaMikdash from being built. Because the Bet HaMikdash began to be built. King Koresh put a halt to it. The 10 sons of Haman were the ones that were instrumental in influencing that the construction should not continue, should not take place of the Bet HaMikdash. What did we say that the Bet HaMikdash represents? The neck. So they were the ones that wanted to sever the neck that joins the head of the Jewish people, the source, the root, God, and the Jewish people, the body. And that is why Haman sought to hang Mordechai. So important was this hanging, wanting to hang Mordechai. It wasn't just the hanging of Mordechai. It was just to end the relationship between spirituality and physicality for good. To sever its ties. There will never ever be a Bet HaMikdash again. You recall that we discussed many years ago that when Queen Esther came to Ahashverosh and she says, look, I have a request. What is it? What is it that you request? Ad Hatzi HaMalchut, I'll give you up to Hatzi HaMalchut, up to half of the kingdom. What was half of the kingdom? So the Gemara tells us it refers to ask me anything, but not the Binyan Bet HaMikdash, that the kingdom, the very essence of the kingdom is standing upon, is dependent upon. Because remember, we mentioned in the meal that the Hashverosh made a meal in the 3rd year of his reign. Why not the 1st year of his reign? So the simple reason, because that's when he took a solid hold of the kingdom. But others explain because he was celebrating that the prophecy of the prophet that the temple will be destroyed, will be rebuilt after 7 years, will not come to fruition. He was celebrating. He took out all of the items of the temple, of the clothing of the Kohen Gadol. He put it on. That was what he was celebrating. And that was the objection of the sages, specifically Mordechai, that the Jewish people partook of the meal. How could you? Even if it's kosher, how could you? How could you lose hope in the building of the Bet HaMikdash? And what does the Bet HaMikdash represent? The neck, that which joins us. We cannot be without it. Incidentally, that's what the Rokeach says, that there are two items of the temple that will always be symbolized throughout our history. The festival of Hanukkah and the festival of Purim that represent those two important items of the neck of the temple that represents the two important items within the neck, the windpipe and the breathing pipe. And so Haman, as I mentioned before, wasn't just a physical battle, it was a spiritual battle. He wanted to sever the ties. No Bet HaMikdash, no Sanhedrin, which Mordechai was the head of the Sanhedrin, by the way. And in Shir HaShirim, in chapter 4, verse 4, it refers to the Sanhedrin as the neck. Kemigdal David Savarech Banui Letalpiot. Kemigdal David, like the Tower of David, is your neck. That refers to the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin is the supreme body of rabbis that resided in the temple. Mordechai was the head of the Sanhedrin. There was still a Sanhedrin, even though the temple was destroyed. Mordechai sought to rebuild the temple. Haman sought to make sure that not only there's no temple, of which his children, the 10 sons of Haman, put a stop to, but that there is no head of the Sanhedrin as well. Cut his head off, chop his head off, hang him. Choke those two ingredients that are so crucial and vital for the Jewish people in the neck. And that's why he came in the middle of the night. He came in the middle of the night. So important. Can't wait till the next day. Yes, it's so important for him. That's like, sometimes someone comes up to you, and a child or a friend comes up to you, something seems to you so trivial. What are you, in the middle of this? I'm in the middle of a wedding. I'm there, you come up to me, whatever it is. But to them, at that moment, it's like important. Otherwise, to them, it's important, it's crucial. Haman wanted to hang Mordechai on the gallows, and to him it was so crucial enough that he was willing to go against normal etiquette and wake the king up in the middle of his slumber and sleep. So by rectifying the meal, so to speak, by reconnecting ourselves, the head, the Jewish people, and the body, the head of the Jewish people, God, and the body, through Torah study and through what the discipline of Torah study does, and how it enables us to discipline our lives and what we eat and how we eat and what we do, etc., it's able to reconnect. Able to rectify the sin of the meal. And that's why on Purim, specifically we have a meal. Because that meal corresponds to that part of the temple that corresponds to the esophagus. The elevation of our material world to God. That is one of the ways that we rectify the world. Specifically through a meal. As opposed to Hanukkah, we don't have a meal on Hanukkah. We have a meal on Purim. Because Purim corresponds to the table is on, what did we say? The right. The esophagus is on the right. So I see how it corresponds exactly. And that's why we have a meal on Purim. And that's what the Baal HaRokeach, one of the early authorities, teaches us. That Hanukkah corresponds to the menorah. And Purim corresponds to the showbread in the temple. And even though that the temple has been destroyed, we have these two important symbols, two important festivals that correspond to these two powerful concepts, of which represent the very neck, the very life source, the very thing that joins and bridges between us and between God. So ultimately what happened? When a Jew conducts himself the way he's meant to conduct himself, then the exact opposite happens. Our bond with God is strengthened, and the bond of impurity is weakened. Has less of a hold, less of a grip. And incidentally, we discussed on a previous occasion, when Mashiach comes, it says that all of the festivals, because there will be such a great light of revelation of God, and every festival has its revelation, they will pale in insignificance to the extent that it says that the festivals will be null and void. It doesn't mean that the festivals will be null and void, that they won't exist. They will still exist. But their light, because there was miracles that happened on these festivals, there was a godly revelation that happened on these festivals, will pale in comparison to the revelation that will exist when Mashiach comes, except for Purim. Except for Purim. You think the other way around. You think Hanukkah is a greater miracle. No, what happened on Purim? Everything seemed to be all within the realm of nature, within the realm of normalcy, of normal bodily things that happen in the world. Haman wanted to destroy. Happened to be that the queen was Esther, and she was Jewish, and then she told the king, and the king destroyed. It seems that everything was all hidden and cloaked within the realm of nature, of normal bodily things, normal human things. Hanukkah was a miracle. The Jewish people, very few went against the battle. They won a huge army, as happened in modern Jewish history, by the way. Miracles. Similarly, the fact that the candelabra burnt for 8 days is a miracle. It's an open and clear miracle expressing God's love for his people. In Purim, one can easily err and choose to see, well, these are all happenings. Like I heard just now, one of the ministers in Iran, or the prime minister of Iran, just says, look at the Jewish people. The whole story of what he called it is all about influence and about the queen getting rid of the prime minister, the second in command, and how they're there, and that's how the Jewish people work. And, you can all explain, that's what he just said now. That's how you can explain it all away within, influences, more power and this and influence. One can make that mistake. But the objective of a Jew is to be able to see beyond the cloak of nature, beyond the cloak of human activity, and see the hand of God, even how he works within nature. This is a greater miracle. This is a greater achievement. It's even a greater achievement than the miracle of Hanukkah. It's a less revelation of God, but to be sure, as we mentioned before, the difference between Abraham and Haran was that to be able to see beyond the cloak of nature. If you're able to do that, then really you've heralded in, to a certain degree, the mentality of the redemption, the mentality of the messianic redemption in your life. And for this reason, the miracle of Purim, because of its light, because it's associated with the body, and it is the body that will herald in the messianic redemption, of course together with the soul, but the Almighty implants a soul into a body, and the body is the one that is to be refined. The soul is holy. It's a big slog. It's a toil. It's an effort for the body to become refined. But it is that body and it is this world that will be the cause, the catalyst, and also the reciprocal of the divine revelation. For this reason, the festival of Purim, its significance and its spiritual light will not diminish even in the time of Mashiach, because there is a similarity between the two. Okay, we'll stop here.